Work hard. It sounds so cliche, but there's no getting around.
Yeah, it's real.
Really working hard and really being good at whatever it is you want to do. Be the guy who's going to work the hardest. I mean, there's really no way around it.
Doug, thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
the sessions, we try to make it as informative as possible for musicians that are watching this to kind of see and hear and learn on how you have really designed your path. Your path has been extremely interesting. And another one of these great musicians out of the University of Miami. My gosh, this area down here is so rich with art and music and culture of what has happened in this mix of all the different styles that are happening down here, and you're right at the front of it, so thank you so much for joining us.
Again, like I said, I'm a fan of what you do and the sessions panel in general, so I'm glad you asked.
Thanks so much. Like, tell me where, now, I have here, when you entered school at the University of Miami, tell me beforehand, where did music enter the core of you wanting to play and get involved? Where did it start?
Yeah, I used to spend a lot of time at my grandmother's house. Right across the street was a whole family that all played piano, but crazy good, classical pianists. Had a Steinway in the house, the whole thing, right? And it just absolutely fascinated me. And I would always go over there and try and plunk out something. And then finally everybody said, you got to get this kid lessons. I grew up sort of in the north end of town, and this was the south end of Miami. So I grew up, I took lessons from a piano teacher in the north end, but that was sort of the inspiration.
How beautiful. So with lessons now, you were learning classical, legitimate playing?
Yeah, sort of stereotypical. I was a kid playing classical music, doing all the Bach two-part inventions and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely grew up that way, yeah.
Fantastic. Was there any music you were listening to outside of that at that time?
No, I mean, I was a bit young. My dad had some records around. He was a big sort of folk guy, had like a Roger Whittaker album and stuff like that.
Interesting.
So that's kind of what I heard.
Yeah.
My grandfather, believe it or not, was big on like show tunes, and opera. So obviously, I think some of that stuff had an influence. My listening didn't really start to take hold in listening to music until I kind of got into my teenage years. I met some people that sort of turned me on to big band stuff and playing that stuff, and so that was a whole new thing for me. So listening to that and learning that at an early age was, very informative and formative.
Yeah, absolutely. Boy, so folk, classical, that's opera. That's really a great beginning for the core.
Yeah, it's varied for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, fantastic. So from there on, you're continuing lessons. You're taking lessons.
Yeah.
Did you start meeting other musicians and?
My musical talents were identified pretty early, so I was sort of singled out as the music kid, and they had a 1 day a week music program that I would be shipped off to, and I had a teacher who was very supportive, and through him met some other older musicians, and I got introduced again to playing big band music through them. Participating in that big band, I met, guys that I still know today, Lee Levin. I met in that band, a few other horn players, and that sort of started my path on, nope, this is what I want to do, and that trajectory started really at like around 10, 11, 12 was.
Boy, how amazing, this whole Miami scene of the family of players.
Yeah.
You mentioned Lee Levin, who we had in here, Richie Bravo, and all these phenomenal, George Noriega, all these great singers that were all kind of like in this. You guys grew up together.
Yeah, we really did.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it's one of the biggest reasons why I've never left Miami. I really appreciated that community and appreciated the camaraderie. These guys are my brothers, so it's hard to leave that when you found it.
That's beautiful. So. Beautiful. Miami, where'd that come into the picture?
Those are where my buddies were going, So in high school, we have a school here now called New World School of the Arts. The predecessor to that was a program called PAVAC, Performing and Visual Arts Center. I participated in that, and Lee Levin participated in that. And so U of M was just sort of the natural progression. Like if you were a good player, that's where you went. At that time, there weren't a ton of options, really. There was University of Miami, there was Berkeley, there was NTSU, maybe USC.
Yeah.
I don't think you have the options back then that you have today in terms of some really good programs.
Big difference,
I really wanted to go with my buddies. So I was like, I'm going there. Yeah.
So you go there, you're majoring in what?
I actually, believe it or not, I went in as a music engineering major.
Really?
Yeah, and quickly found out that that's not what I wanted to do. The thought process was I knew I wanted to be in the studio. And I thought the way to get into the studio was let me be a music engineer guy who plays. And what I realized, a lot of guys who were coming out of that program were getting tech gigs, working for Dolby or something like that. And that wasn't what I wanted to do. I really wanted to play. So I, switched over to a performance major.
What were some of the performance opportunities that Miami U offered?
There were a ton of ensembles. Like, I was involved in a rock ensemble and different ensembles. I was never the heavy jazzer. Like, I was never going to be Chick. You know what I mean? That just wasn't going to happen. I always sort of gravitated to the more the pop and rock thing. That was sort of my vibe.
That's fantastic. I had the chance to sit down with Chick Corea and interview him.
Yeah.
And, and his whole direction is a whole other wonderful story of how these great players and how they follow their path. You followed your path, which I think is really absolutely very, very interesting. From that point on now, you're playing with a wide variety of different musicians.
Yeah.
Playing different styles of music.
Tons. And that's one of the great things about Miami is you're provided with the opportunity to explore a lot of different genres.
Yeah.
And, look, I think just like anybody else trying to make a living, you're like piecing together this gig and then this gig and then this gig. And so all that, becomes this homogenous thing that makes you the musician you are today, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's what happened. Yeah, it was just trying to make a living and take all these gigs and make it work.
So you start working the local scene, and then you hook up, I think it was Ilan Chester? Was he the first one that you kind of started touring with?
So I'd left town for a couple of years. Actually, believe it or not, worked on cruise ships for a couple of years.
Nice.
I was a young man, and there was travel involved, and I'm like, all right, let's do that. And so I came back into town. Lee Levin had been obviously somebody, like I mentioned, somebody I had grown up with.
Yeah.
He was one of the first people I called when I got back into town. Hey, I'm in town, what's going on? And he said, your timing couldn't be better. I'm putting this band together for a Venezuelan pop star named Ilan Chester. Would you want to do it? And I was like, absolutely. And so it just sort of happened, and I called at the right time. And
boy, talk about fate and how sometimes things just align.
Timing was perfect.
When the stars are aligned, it works out great. How long were you on tour with them doing that?
That actually was just a month. We did a one-off show in Puerto Rico and then a month in Venezuela during December. That whole band, that was December, and then that whole band basically became the touring band for another artist, an Argentinian pianist named Ronald de Blasio.
Raul, yeah, beautiful player.
And I was with him, I still do work for him. I've been with him now on and off for almost 26 years. But that was great because that whole unit sort of moved together into his gig, and we haven't separated since.
Absolutely. Well, that's what really amazes me about the family mentality here in Miami.
Yeah.
It's this everyone's kind of helping each other and calling up and let's do this here and let's work this here, and it's still this. It seems like it's been decades of this kind of relationship that has gone on.
On that Ilan Chester gig, I met Dan Warner. And Dan and I own a studio together to this day. And I think all of us too try to be supportive of the next guy up, right?
Yeah.
The one thing that I would say is I was always very well aware of the fact that I really wanted to support the younger guys and the guys coming up behind me, because I think that's one of the great things that makes LA great, right? Is you have like the depth is awesome.
Yeah.
And so that's always something I wanted to try and support here, was creating depth. And not just having this sort of closed community, but really inviting other guys and encouraging other guys to get in and do good work.
It seems to be that way, and it seems to be even getting better and better with that. There's more people coming in, and there's more growth. It's incredible.
Some of the younger guys in particular are doing some really great work down here. It's great. It's great to see, and hopefully advances our community as a whole.
Absolutely. Was there a mixture of touring and then doing work here in sessions in studio? Was there a balance that you were experiencing with that?
Yeah, for sure. Comparing us to LA, once again, one of the differences I would say is you can't niche out the way you can in like an LA, right? You can't just be a touring guy or just be a session guy, or you can't even just be a particular genre guy. The way the work is here is you kind of have to do a little bit of all of it.
Yeah.
You know, and definitely at the beginning, I was doing a little bit of all of it. You know, definitely doing touring work, as well as, you know, I got started recording with Rudy Perez. And so I was his in-house arranger, programming guy, and so I was doing stuff with him, and in the meantime, going on tour with de Blasio or Julio or whoever else was calling.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, again, you put it all together and it sort of makes a living.
How beautiful, but beautiful. But there's an interesting balance because Rudy Perez will have an interview here with him, and again, very interesting. And these are names that when you mention these names, I want the listening audience to do the research.
Yeah.
And find out the depth of who these people are.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so important.
Yeah.
The balance of the business side and personal side, and even the artistic side, keeping your playing at a high level, organizing the business side, and then having a home life.
Yeah.
How do you balance all that?
Wow. That's a great question. It's a choice to say, you know, I do want to have a home life and I want to be connected to my kids and my wife and have all that. Sometimes you have to just put boundaries with your clients or with people who you're working for and say, listen, I'm going to go home for dinner now.
Yeah.
And it can be a bit, you get sort of weird looks sometimes. I mean, even to this day, you know, I really try to make my studio life as 9 to 5 as possible. And every once in a while, I'll get a look from somebody like, what are you talking about? You know, be confident in your convictions and what's important to you. And it's sort of, people start to go, okay, all right, I get it. Yeah. And they gain respect for it. Yeah. But initially it was tough, especially as a young man. You know, you're trying to get in and you're trying to make a name for yourself. And you don't want to seem like you're not interested in working, right? Yeah, you want to be there and get the job done and get a job done well.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is you quickly learn that having that balance actually makes you a healthy, well-rounded, you know, musician, and you're probably better off for it.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, art is about expression, and we need to understand the emotions of life, that we have something in which to express.
That is
so
it.
So it really kind of comes down to that bottom line.
That's it.
Talking more about Rudy Perez, what an interesting person and what a deep, deep talent.
Personally, I owe him deep gratitude because, quite frankly, he took me in at a time and took me on as part of his team at a time when I was very green. You know, I appreciated his patience and his being willing to mentor me the way he did for the several years that I was in his camp. Like you said, I think everybody here who's listening to this interview should go do their research. Rudy has a very deep history within our community and within the Latin music scene in general.
Worldwide.
Worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
To have that be my first entree into the recording scene, I mean, I am incredibly grateful. And I look back at it now and you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. But now I know what I didn't know then. And so it's amazing. Like I'm amazed at you know, that he kept me around. But you know, again, I guess he saw something.
Well, that's the next question, because Rudy, you know, in many people, what do you think he saw in you that he felt that even though this kid is green, there's something there that I want to invest in? What was it?
You know, we talk about the balance, but I am someone who is, once you give me a job to do, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, and I'm going to work hard to do it to the best of my ability. Yeah. And I'm not a cut corners kind of guy. Yeah. I'd like to think that that's what he saw, as well as, you know, hopefully he saw some musical talent, of course.
I'm sure he did.
But the work ethic I think, is probably what he saw, and me willing to put that ethic into getting the job done.
Very powerful 2 words, work ethic.
Yeah.
Where do you think that came from? How did you develop it? And how do you maintain that work ethic at a high level? Because you really are at a very high level.
You know, I'm sure it's been ingrained in me from some sort of, you know, my dad was a bit of a taskmaster, you know, I mean, not horrible, but definitely instilled working hard, a bit of fear of failure that drives you, you know, who wants to be the guy that doesn't get the job done, right? So there's the fear of failure. And the other thing is knowing what else was out there. Like, I knew Robbie Buchanan existed, right? You know, so I knew what I was trying to get to. Yeah. And even guys in town, when I first got into this business or doing this kind of work, there are guys here in town, Eddie Martinez, who used to work with Rudy. Yeah. A guy named Mike Levine, Lester Mendez was in town at the time. I mean, those were guys that I looked up to and was trying to aspire to get to that level, right? So those were my inspirations in, just trying to get better at my job.
Who were other piano players that influenced you? Like when you were younger, listening to? Who'd you listen to that maybe you stole some ideas from?
Again, my background is in jazz playing, so I'm a huge Bill Evans guy.
Beautiful.
Like to me, he's, even from an arrangement standpoint, like when you listen to his piano playing, I tend to listen to him as an arranger almost, because there is so much of that in what he does. And then Herbie, obviously for me, was
Herbie Hancock, still at this day. At this day.
So I mean, I just from a piano playing standpoint, there was that, and then you get into the pop thing, and again, I was a huge Robbie Buchanan fan when I first got into the business. I mean, to me, if you go back and listen to what Robbie did in the 80s and early 90s, it's just unbelievable.
Brilliant stuff in how he arranged and composed.
Just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Randy Waldman is great.
What another great player.
I mean, so those guys for me, Greg Fillingames.
Oh, Greg, we had him interviewed him.
Yeah.
We interviewed him here. It was a beautiful
When
guy.
I've had the opportunity to do a few things with Greg, and it's again, those are my heroes.
Yeah. The discipline side, when you think about how the business side is right now, how much time do you spend with the business side of what's happening? I mean, I find myself, I'm getting up in the morning early, and I'm handling, I'm at my computer, I'm at my command center, so to speak, and I'm answering emails and social media stuff, and I'm going through all this stuff here, and I've got to prepare certain things, and then I can get into the action of what's happening. How much of that do you have to do?
I have a wife who's a teacher, so that gets me out of bed pretty early. So I, usually help to get her out the door, and then, like you said, I'm on my emails and checking emails and make sure that I'm handling the business end, like you say. And also currently, I happen to be the president of the Florida chapter of the Recording Academy.
Oh, interesting.
So I have that to deal with on my plate as well, and I really try to handle that before I get into the studio, or before I sit at the piano, because I do try to still sit at the piano for about an hour every morning. So as much of that as I can take care of before I get to the studio, because once I'm at the studio, I'd rather just concentrate on the creative and arranging side of things and doing that stuff. But again, I still have to keep one eye on that stuff, because stuff's happening all day long.
Calls are coming in, things are happening. So tell me what's happening with the recording. You're on the board. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I'm the president of the Florida chapter of the Recording Academy. So
what does that involve?
Well, again, it's time consuming. It involves time. I work with the executive director to decide what our focus is going to be and the things that we try to accomplish within the pillars of the Academy, the advocacy and membership and education pillars.
Nice.
So we talk all the time. I talk to staff a lot about what it is we want to do and accomplish, and then trying to put that stuff in motion.
Well, it's pretty powerful when you think about that you're influencing these next generations.
Not to plug too much, but I mean, that organization as a whole, most people of course know the Grammy show, and that's what that's the face of it. But what's behind the show is some really amazing work that organization does. So I'm really proud to be a part of it, and why I took on the responsibility, because I believe in what they do.
Well, in touring and doing the MD, the musical director for Barry Gibb, and I mean, that's another whole serious production of responsibility of what that is.
Yeah.
But you said you still maintain time for some time in the morning or whenever to sit at the piano.
Yeah.
To maintain your playing. What are you working on to maintain that?
It varies, and it usually varies depending on what my duties are at the time. I've gotten into going back to my classical roots.
Interesting.
Right? So,
very interesting.
I picked up one of these books that has sort of the top 40 of classical piano literature, and I just kind of flip through the book and play that. And then I always try to find something to transcribe or listen to. You'd be amazed, I'm amazed, at how it affects your playing in a positive way, even in ways you don't expect. So, if I'm checking out a Matt Rawlings piano part and I want to check out what he's doing, okay, I'm working on that right now, but then all of a sudden when I get to the studio, something else that completely unrelated seems just to come faster. I don't know. There's something about that process that opens up some other door when I go to the studio and have to do something that seemingly is unrelated. And the other part of it too, I have to admit, is it comes out of a bit of a psychosis and neuroses for me, which is I feel like a late bloomer as a musician. So I always feel like I'm playing catch up to the guys who I look up to, you know, like I brought up Matt Rawlings. You know, I think Matt's awesome. Yeah. And so, you know, there's a part of it that's driven by that, you know, still feeling like I gotta, you know, get to that level.
Boy, very interesting. Why do you think you're a late bloomer? What do you feel like?
There's some light bulbs that went off for me that I think went off for some guys at an earlier age than me. You know, I don't know. One thing I always talk about when I talk to people is because I grew up as a classical kid, and so my thing was put a piece of music in front of me and I'll play that for you. That's what I do, right? I put something in front of me and I play.
Many classical musicians are like that.
Right. So for me, it was a lot of years before I realized music isn't exactly put something in front of me and I'll play it, right? There's a whole other part of it that has nothing to do with what's in front of you. It's this oral art and creating in the moment. And I attribute learning that and really integrating that into my playing to Ronald de Blasio, the artist who we talked about.
Yeah.
Raul, to this day, is someone that if I get on stage with him, I know his material, I know his songs, but I have no idea how he's going to do it. I don't know what's coming, and he will pull out stuff that we have never even talked about, right? And you just got to go with it. And so that was a light bulb for me to go, oh, really making music is this other thing, you know? And I think for a lot of guys, that light bulb goes off sooner than it did for me, because for a lot of years, for me, music was put something in front of me and I'll play it, and I can play anything. You know.
Well, how interesting, how very interesting. You know, it's funny when I go out and perform with certain bands and there isn't time to really kind of put things together, we'll call certain standards. Yeah. And they'll say, well, you know, when are we going to get together to rehearse? Yeah. And my line is, rehearsal is for cowards. Yeah. There's a certain...
It's funny. There was a time where I would have done the same thing, and it's funny because there's an artist here in town that I work with, and he just wants to rehearse all the time, and you know, I just can't do it.
You over-rehearse to a point where you just. So I guess what Raul's doing is he's putting everybody on that momentary spot where you got to really be in the moment.
You have to
pay attention to hear, and that's the excitement of the spontaneity of music. Well, that's beautiful.
I've really learned to embrace it and actually enjoy it.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with artists both ways, right? I've worked with the artist who was completely scripted and you knew exactly, he was choreographed and you knew exactly where he was going to be when, and that's cool too, right? Yeah. Like to have that sort of polished show.
Yeah.
That's great. But then it's also fun to go to a whole nother show and get up on stage and go, I don't know what's going to happen, but you know, and there is no musical situation that I'm going to get into that at this point I feel uncomfortable with. Right? Like it's given me the confidence to pretty much get into just about anything, and I feel like I'm going to be able to hold my own. So I appreciate that experience.
Well, all the artists that I have talked to that have worked with you as a musical director, what are some of the responsibilities that an MD has to take care of?
It may not be the one you think. The first place everybody goes to is being an arranger, and there is some of that, obviously. But the reality is, if you call the right guys, there's very little of that. I've always seen my job mostly as a liaison between the band and artist and management, right? So that way the artist doesn't have to worry about anything, and there aren't 10 guys coming to management about something. Right. So I've always tried to be that guy, the in-between between band and management and or the artist. So that's probably the biggest thing I would say, and maybe a slight misconception in the general public out there about what that job, or at least how I see it.
How you see it.
There is some arranging involved, obviously, and I do a fair amount of that. But you know, especially like, for example, with Barry, he wants to do the Bee Gee tunes like he's done them, and you know, so it's basically, guys, here's how we're gonna do, here's, you know, how it sounds, and go do that. And with these guys that we have, there's really not much to say.
Lee and Richie, these guys that
Yeah.
you've worked with years, these are just seasoned
Yeah.
pros.
If I say anything, I'm just getting in the way.
You know, and that family of how they are,
Yeah.
you guys are all into mind reading at this
Well,
point.
and there's a look that we can
It
give
really
each other.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
There really is this connection that I've noticed. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
What motivates you?
Fear of failure. Yeah, that's a pretty strong motivating factor. You know, especially once you start to have a family and you've chosen this to support your family.
Yeah.
Now it's like, okay, well, I got to put food on the table and make sure there's a roof over their heads.
Yeah,
So, you know, I don't think I've gotten anywhere, right? There's no destination, it's a journey. There's always somebody out there that I'm trying to get to, you know? So it's wanting to be better. It's wanting to be the guy that Barry Gibb calls when he wants to make music. And it's wanting to, you know, support the family, and you know, that's all very motivating.
That's a great, great balance. In closing, we have these young musicians that sparkles in their eye for wanting to be involved in the music industry. And in the music industry now, it's multifaceted. There are several different income streams that we have to now have to make all this work.
Right.
What advice would you give to this next generation? Here you are, MD with Barry, all these fantastic acts that you're doing, you're playing, you're really living the dream. What would you tell this next generation on how they can do that?
Work hard. You know, it sounds so cliche, but there's no getting around.
Yeah, it's real.
Really working hard and really being good at whatever it is you want to do. Be the guy who's going to work the hardest. I mean, there's really no way around it, because there are so many guys out there trying to do it. The gigs are getting fewer, you know, because of how music is made and how shows are created. You have to be undeniable.
Well, you absolutely know your stuff, because you're right at the forefront of pushing this and making this industry exciting, playing with musicians that are really moving this art form forward. You're there doing it. Doug, thank you so much on behalf of the session.
Thank you for asking.
You've done great.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks again for asking.